Good morning, my dear friends. Welcome to our weekly Parsha Shiur. This week, of course, we are studying Parsha's Beshalach. And this Parsha, of course, is very famous because it contains the story of the splitting of the sea. It contains the famous Shiur, the famous song that the Jews sang upon witnessing all the miracles at the Yam Suf that they saw. And it is, in that sense, an incredible Parsha. If you have a Chumash in front of you, please follow along with me. I'm going to read actually just one pasuk today and one Rashi. This pasuk can be found at the end of the song that the Jewish people sang after the Shiur. When it was all over, when they had concluded singing, when they had concluded witnessing themselves be saved, when they had concluded witnessing the Egyptians being drowned, when everything was over. The men had sung their song, the women had sung their song, everybody had done their thing. And the Torah begins to tell us what happens after that. So if you have a Chumash in front of you, I'm reading Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Chav Beis. The Pasuk says, Vayasa Moshe es Yisrael miyam suf. Moshe Rabbeinu made the Jews travel away from the Yam Suf. Vayetzu el midbar Shur, and they traveled into the desert. Vayelchu shloishes yomim bamidbar, they walked for 3 days in the desert. V'loi motzu mayim, and they did not find any water. And the Torah goes on to say that they came to a place called Morah, and they found water over there. In Morah there was water. They couldn't drink the water because the water was bitter, which is how the name Morah, which literally means bitter, came to become the name of that particular place. And of course, they complained to Moshe, and Hashem tells Moshe to cast a tree into the water, and the water becomes sweet, etc., etc. But the commentaries, including Rashi, jump on this first word, the very first word that the Torah uses to describe how the Jewish people travel, how the Jewish people move on, how the story continues. After the splitting of the sea, after the Shiur, when it was all over, the very first word, instead of saying that Moshe and the Jewish people traveled, it says, Vayasa Moshe es Yisrael, Moshe caused the Jewish people to travel. Which, of course, the commentaries have much to say. It sounds like just a simple nuance. Moshe caused the Jewish people to travel. Moshe told the Jewish people to travel. But here the rabbis see an incredibly important choice of words in the Torah. I'm going to read, if you have the Rashi in front of you, Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Chav Beis. Here is the Rashi explaining the choice of words. Why the Torah says Vayasa instead of just the regular Vayiso, they traveled. It says Rashi, Vayasa Moshe, Moshe made the Jews travel. Hision bal korcha. Rashi says Moshe made the Jewish people travel against their will. The Jews didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay. Moshe forced them to leave. Why did the Jews not want to leave? What's there to do? They've been saved. The Egyptians have been drowned. Seems like everything is over. The party's over. The show is over. The song has been sung. The dance has been danced. Everything, the lights have been turned off. Seems like everything is over. Says Rashi, She'itru Mitzrayim es suseihem. The Egyptians had an interesting custom. They would decorate their horses b'tachshitei zohav v'kesef, with silver, with gold and silver jewelry, bavonim tovas, and diamonds. V'hoyu Yisrael moitzin oisan bayam. The Jews were finding this gold and this silver. They were finding it in the sea and around the sea and on the seashore. In fact, Rashi says they collected more money, they collected more spoils at the sea than they did when they left Mitzrayim. And he brings a pasuk to prove it. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu had to drag the Jews away from the Yam Suf. He had to force them to leave the sea because the Jewish people were making a fortune. They were all bent down on the ground. The water The sand was filled with the gold, with the silver, with the ornaments, with the jewelry, with the diamonds, with the treasures that the Egyptians used to adorn their horses. Now, why did the Egyptian put these gold and silver ornaments, the jewelry, the diamonds, why did they put it on their horses? This Rashi doesn't say, but it seems from my limited understanding of how it worked, of how things worked in those days, how the world worked in those days, how armies worked in those days, that the horses was a very important part of the lifestyle back then. That, the horses it was a sign of a country's power. It was a sign of a country's army. They spent a lot of time training their horses, finding their horses, developing their horses. We even have many Hasidic, we even have many Hasidic stories about horses. Horses was a very important part of the lifestyle back then. Again, we'll get into this more soon. So the Egyptians, the horses was their sign of power. The horses was a sign of wealth, both on a private level and on a national level. So the Egyptians who had special horses, right? In fact, the Torah makes this known that Egypt is the source of all the good horses. So the Egyptians were very proud of their horses. They had a lot of pride in their ferden. And they made this be known in that they decorated their horses with all this tremendous amount of jewelry and diamonds and precious stones, etc. Perhaps, again, I don't know exactly how they did this. Perhaps they hung them around the horses' necks. Perhaps they hung them on the chariots. Perhaps, be it as it may, there was a tremendous amount of wealth here. Apparently, after the Egyptians drowned, and their horses drowned, and their chariots ended up in the water, Hashem made it so that the sea spat out all of this wealth. And so the Jews find themselves saved. They find themselves with their captors, with the Egyptians dead, Meisal Sfas Hayom, literally lying on the banks of the sea. And to top it all off, all the Egyptian wealth was lying there on the ground. And so the Jewish people bent down to pick up this money. In fact, Rashi says amazingly, they collected more money at the sea than they did when they left Mitzrayim. And they were busy with it. They were enjoying it. They liked it. But it was time to go. It was time to travel into the desert. It was time for the Jewish people to travel on. It was time for them to leave the Yam Suf and continue with their destiny. This, says Rashi and the commentaries and the Medrash, is the reason why the Torah uses the expression Vayasa Moshe Yisrael miyam suf. Moshe had to force the Jews to travel away from the Yam Suf. They weren't interested. It's not because they wanted to stay at the Yam Suf. They weren't interested in the Yam Suf. It wasn't the sea they were interested in. It was all the wealth that was deposited at their feet at the Yam Suf that they were interested in. This is what they were busy collecting. Nobody wanted to travel anywhere. But Moshe tells the Jews it's time to go. Now the Jewish people leave. The Torah makes it clear that they do leave, but they do so bal korcham, they do so against their will. This is the reason why the Pasuk doesn't say that Moshe and the Yidden traveled away from the sea. It doesn't say Vayisu or Vayiso. It says Vayasa Moshe Yisrael. Moshe forced the Jews to travel away from the sea because they didn't want to leave after all of this wealth that they were collecting. This is again the simple understanding of Rashi and the Medrash, who comment on this choice of words in the Pasuk right after the story of the Yam Suf. Moshe Rabbeinu dragged the Jews away from the sea where they were collecting money to go off to the desert because eventually there was a destiny. They were headed off to the Matan Torah. They were headed off to getting the Torah. They were headed off to eventually to Eretz Yisrael, to the Promised Land, etc., etc. It's kind of like if any of you field shidduchim questions, right? Where people call up and do research about young men and young women interested in finding out about shidduchim. So one of the terms that people use about young men, they say, is he, quote, a learner or an earner? Maybe you've heard this before. Is the young man a learner or an earner? What's the difference between a learner and an earner? A learner in the frum world, a learner means somebody who's planning to spend their life or the next couple of years sitting and studying Torah. It's called a learner. An earner means somebody who's planning after he gets married to go and work and earn money. So there are learners and there are earners. In this sense, the Jewish people were by the Yam Suf and they were all earners, right? They were bending down and they were picking up the money. Moshe Rabbeinu says, it's time to stop earning and it's time to start learning. It's time to leave the Yam Suf and to go to Matan Torah, to go to Har Sinai and receive the Torah. I'm not getting into the debate of which one is right and which one is wrong. I'm just using this as a cute way to articulate what's going on here. Moshe forces the Jews away from the Yam Suf, off to their destiny, to Matan Torah and to Eretz Yisrael. The idea, let me just add this, before we start dissecting, the idea that the Jewish people made more money at the Yam Suf than they did in Mitzrayim is absolutely incredible. Or at least that there was more money to be collected at the Yam Suf than there was in Mitzrayim is absolutely incredible. If you remember, we learned last week that when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, they had inventory lists of all the Egyptian wealth. They knew where every Egyptian family stored its money and where every Egyptian family stored its stuff and where every Egyptian family, and before they left, they weren't mavata, they didn't let go of anything. They did their best to clear out Mitzrayim. 7 days later at the Yam Suf, it turns out they cleared out nothing. There was more wealth at the Yam, at the sea, than there was when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim. We're talking about tremendous amounts of wealth. And so Moshe Rabbeinu has to force them, successfully, Moshe Rabbeinu does, the Jewish people leave the Yam Suf, but they do so begrudgingly because they have to walk away from all of this money. Okay, this is the Rashi, this is from the Medrash, this is the commentary on the first words of the Torah after the splitting of the sea. Okay, now let's dissect just for a couple of minutes. Let's think together. This is an incredibly difficult passage to understand. Number one, what did the Jewish people need so much money for? What were they planning to do with all of it? At this stage, the Jews are either headed into the desert or they're headed into Eretz Yisrael. Either way, all right, we can assume at this stage the Jews thought they were going into Eretz Yisrael. Or at the very least, they knew they were going to have to travel through the desert to go to Eretz Yisrael. What were they planning to do with all of this money? Of what value was it? In the desert, there's very little you can do with it. And when they were coming into Eretz Yisrael, they knew they were going to conquer an entirely new country, together with all of its resources and together with all of its wealth. They had been promised by Hashem that they were going to inherit a land flowing with milk and honey. So as we start scratching the surface, we start wondering why the Jews, it's usually not difficult, it's usually not difficult to understand why a person is excited or invested in money. It's not a difficult thing to understand. But if you think about in context where the Jewish people are and where they're going, actually, this does become a little difficult to understand. What's the big excitement here? What's the große Behola to collect so much money? In the Midbar, in the desert, it's for sure not very significant. I mean, it's not a currency in the desert. What are they going to do with it? And in Eretz Yisrael, I mean, when they got there, they were going to become farmers. They were going to cultivate a land which they had been promised by Hashem was flowing with milk and honey. So I guess the first scratch at the surface here is, let's think about this. What are the Jews so passionate about the money here for? What is it that they really want? That's question number one. Question number two, how much money did the Jewish people, how much wealth did the Jewish people leave Mitzrayim with? What did they have when they left Egypt? According to the Medrash, and this is one of my favorite Medrashim, if you've heard it from me before, I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat it with as much gusto as I can. Ein lecha kol echad ve'echad misol, says the Medrash, there wasn't a single Jew that didn't leave Egypt with tish'im chamoirim, with 90 donkeys. Chamoirim lubin, if I remember correctly, it says white donkeys, a white donkey, which is, a particularly strong, powerful donkey, laden with the gold and silver of Mitzrayim. Every Jew leaves Egypt with 90 donkeys laden with the gold and silver of Egypt. Now, I'll tell you why I love this medrash so much. Not just because it means the Jews are wealthy when they leave Mitzrayim, right? You got to figure every Jew leaving with 90 donkeys. But I love this medrash because I want you to think about for a second just think about numbers here for a minute. We're talking about approximately, at least 2 million Jews leaving Mitzrayim. 2 million Jews, right? We base this number, I keep mentioning this in the Shiur, but we base this number off the fact that the Torah says there were 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Altogether, you're talking about at least 2 million Jews. If each Jew leaves with 90 donkeys, you're talking about, according to my mathematics, you're talking about 180 million donkeys leaving Mitzrayim, laden with the gold and silver of Mitzrayim. Each donkey is full of packages and peklach. You see, it's not a modern day new phenomenon that when Jews travel, they travel with a lot of bags, a lot of peklach, a lot of baggage. This goes back 3,500 years. Every Jew who leaves Mitzrayim, 90 donkeys. 100, and you talk about a parade of 180 million donkeys leaving Mitzrayim. All right, again, does it literally mean 90 donkeys? Does it literally mean every single Jew? Maybe it was every family, but the expression in the Medrash is Ein lecha kol echad vechad miYisrael. There wasn't a single Jew that didn't leave with 90 donkeys, laden with the gold and silver of Mitzrayim. Talk about a mass exodus. Think about, this has got to be one of the greatest stampedes in all of history. 2 million people and 180 million. That's unbelievable. And by the way, it was at least 2 million Jews, right? Many commentators like to put the number closer to 3 million Jews. If it's 3 million Jews, you're talking about 270 million. 270, this is astronomical stuff. Be it as it may, no matter how many millions of donkeys there were leaving Egypt, the bottom line is that every Jew leaves Egypt incredibly wealthy. Incredibly wealthy. Incredibly wealthy. That's what the Medrash is definitely trying to say. They left Egypt as wealthy people. So yes, of course, apparently somehow the Jews missed the majority of the Egyptian wealth. There was more Egyptian wealth on their horses and chariots than the Jewish people left Mitzrayim with. Okay, granted. And they discovered it all at the Yam Suf. Also granted. Fine. But Rabbanu Shalom, what are you going to do with so much money? At some point, here's the question. At some point, it seems like it should start becoming insignificant. Such a vast, where were they even going to put it? What do you do with all this? Right? May God, what does the expression go? May God smite me with it, and may I never recover. We all know from such problems. But be it as it may, the point is, what are they going to do with this kind of wealth? Where are they going to put it? What are they going to do? Why are they still hungry for more? Why are they still interested in more? There's an expression in Chazal. It says that when Mashiach comes, Ma'adanim etzuyin ka'ofer. Ma'adanim etzuyin ka'ofer means things that we consider to be delicacies now will be as available as dirt, as offer, as earth. So the rabbis explain, what does it mean? It doesn't just mean that it'll be available like earth. It means it won't be worth more than dirt. Why? Because when something is so readily available, when something is everywhere, it loses its value. When the world has too much of something, right? If some of you are economists here, you'll be able to explain what I'm saying better than I can. Well, in order for something to retain its value, it needs to be some sort of a commodity. There needs to be some element of scarceness to it. If it's too much available, if it's everywhere, if it's as available as dirt, then it becomes as valuable as dirt. It becomes as valueless as dirt. Who's going to buy who's going to spend money on dirt? Nobody. If I want dirt, I'll go outside and take dirt. I don't need your help. So this, the commentaries explain, when Mashiach comes, ma'adanim etzuyin ka'ofer means the delicacies of the world will be as available as dirt, and therefore they'll be as worthless as dirt. Not worthless as, I mean, you cannot live off dirt. But the point is, in terms of their financial value, it'll lose its value. Because the availability of it, right? What do they call it? Availability, the price of something is determined by how available it is and how much demand. Supply and demand, right? Supply and demand. So if there's no supply, if there's no demand because the supply is overwhelming, you flood the market, then the thing seems to lose its value. So if every Jew, question number 2, if every Jew is leaving Egypt with so much wealth, then why is it still important to them to collect more? Where are they going to put it? What are they going to do with it? It seems like, all right, the Torah wants to make a point that the Jewish people left Egypt with a tremendous amount of wealth. But we seem to be overdoing it here. We seem to be going from the sublime to the ridiculous. Difficult to understand. What's the point? That's question number 2. Now let's ask the mother question. Question number 3. We like to make jokes about Jews chasing money. Unfortunately, our enemies like to poke fun about this too. All right, we like to make fun about Jewish people, always being savvy, always finding a mitzvah, always finding a bargain, etc. We like to make jokes about Jews, having, I don't want to repeat some of the jokes because they've been made, Rahman al-Islam, by terrible anti-Semites, but it's okay to some degree. It's true that Jews can be savvy. A Jew knows how to stretch a dollar. It's true that there is something that Jews, unfortunately, we've dealt with difficult circumstances in our past. We have to make it work sometimes when it's difficult. It's true that Jews have a complicated relationship with money, all true. But let me ask you this. Who are we talking about over here? And what are we talking about over here? We're talking about the Jews who have just witnessed Kriyas Yamsuf. They just sang a Shiur to Hashem. They just witnessed the greatest revelation of godliness actually in our people's history. Besides for the giving of the Torah. The Medrash says that even a shifcha, even a maidservant at the splitting of the sea, saw more revelation of godliness than the prophets. Zeh keli v'anvehu, the Jewish people said after the splitting of the sea. They pointed to Hashem and they said, Zeh keli, this is my God. Hashem ish milchoma, Hashem shmoi. They witnessed a tremendously powerful revelation of godliness. They just sang a Shiur together with Moshe Rabbeinu, a Shiur so beautiful and so holy, we repeat it every single day in davening. And the next thing the Torah wants to tell us is that the Jewish people bent down to pick up money which they didn't need, they didn't have anything to do with, and they were so farkocht, they were so caught up in this, that when it was time to travel, Moshe had to schlep them by the nose. How is this befitting of a people who've just experienced such an amazing, godly, divine experience? Saw such open miracles from Hashem, and just sang such a beautiful Shiur, such a beautiful davening. The next thing you know, they rush to the money and they're devouring it with so much gusto that Moshe Rabbeinu has to force them to leave. The passion that the Torah articulates here, that the Jewish people had for the Egyptian money, it seems out of place. We can understand the Jewish people felt they deserved money for the work that they did. We can understand the Jewish people didn't want to leave it there. Bal tashchis, you're not allowed to waste. We can understand the Jewish people perhaps felt that Hashem miraculously making all of this stuff fall at their feet at the banks of the sea was an indication that they should take it. Fine, all of that is good. But when Moshe Rabbeinu tells you it's time to go, time to go. And where was Moshe Rabbeinu taking them? Moshe Rabbeinu was taking them to Matan Torah. And they knew they were going to Matan Torah. They knew all of this, the Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Kriyas Yamsuf. They knew it was all a miracle from Hashem. And when they knew they were going to have some type of godly, divine experience, Tavduna Solakim, to serve Hashem in some way. In fact, they had already began counting the days in anticipation from the day they left Mitzrayim. They were counting their days with excitement to the giving of the Torah. So having just experienced one of the greatest revelations of God, of godliness in all of history, having just experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim and the 10 plagues of darkness, each one laden with 90 donkeys filled with gold and silver, they're having a hard time following Moshe Rabbeinu's instruction that it's time to leave. Right? Who was it that said, in the United States of America, we spend money we don't have to buy things we don't need to impress people we don't know? Something like that, right? So you think about what's going on over here. The Jewish people are busy collecting money they don't need for a purpose that doesn't exist. What are they even going to do with it at the time that they're not even interested in it? Something about the timing of all of this is disturbing. The very moment after Kriyas Yamsuf, we talk about the splitting of the sea and the miracles, not getting into it this week, but the miracles that were involved and the salvation of Hashem and all the Jewish people experienced psychologically and emotionally, right? They had tremendous fear of the Egyptians, and then Hashem miraculously made them see the Egyptian corpses, and finally the entire Egyptian army is wiped out, and the Jewish people have nothing to fear. The Egyptians are not going to chase them anymore. And Hashem split the sea into 12 channels, and each tribe went through its own channel. And the birds were singing, and they sang a song to Hashem, the likes of which we won't sing again until Mashiach comes in Tchias HaMesim. And the men sang, and the women sang, and they played. The women played music, and they danced, and it was unbelievable. And the Torah says, oh, and you know what happened as soon as all of this was over? The very next moment, the Jewish people found money, a lot of money. And they were so excited about the money they found that Moshe Rabbeinu was having a hard time making them travel on. Travel on to where? To everything that they had left Mitzrayim for. To a relationship with Hashem, to Matan Torah, to Eretz Yisrael, to the Promised Land, to becoming a real nation with a mission, everything. Oh, wait, the Jews said, wait. The Egyptians left more diamonds and more gold and silver on their horses. We don't want to leave until we've collected it. Really? Why? Why was this so important to them? Why did they get so caught up with it? And what does this all mean? Even a slave, even a prisoner, I shouldn't say even, a slave and a prisoner, when they're offered their freedom, will sometimes take it, even if they have to leave without any assets, without having anything to show for it. It seems like after 210 years of the Jewish people being enslaved in Mitzrayim, they should be running to their freedom. They should be rushing for the first time in their existence. The Egyptian army is dead. They can go anywhere and everywhere without fear of being chased. And all they can do is bend down on the ground and pick up money. Surely there must be something else going on here. And here's what it is. The Kabbalists explain that when the Jewish people left Egypt and they took the Egyptian wealth together with them, it wasn't just physical wealth that they were taking. It was also spiritual wealth that they were taking. It wasn't just that Hashem had told them to take the gold and the silver. It wasn't just that Hashem had told them to take the Egyptian assets with them as they left for monetary, for materialistic reasons. There was a spiritual element to this as well. There were, again, I'll put it for you in the words of the Kabbalists, and then I'll try a little bit to explain. There were, the Mekubalim explained, there were what we call nitzutzei kedusha, sparks of holiness. There were godly forces, godly powers that was hidden inside this money, that was hidden inside these, the wealth that they took, that the Yidden took out of Mitzrayim, which when the Jewish people took it out of Mitzrayim, they, again, I'll give it to you in the language of the Mekubalim, they redeemed these sparks of holiness that were inside this wealth that they took out of Mitzrayim. For this reason, again, I'll explain in a minute. For this reason, we find that Hashem makes a big deal out of the fact that the Jewish people should leave Mitzrayim with the Egyptian wealth. In fact, there's an expression in last week's Parsha where Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Daber no ba'oznei ha'am. Please, Hashem begs with Moshe, please warn the Jews that they should not leave empty-handed. Make sure they should take the wealth of the Egyptians with them when they leave. What does this mean? It turns out, my dear friends, that Hashem has created lots of wealth in this world. Hashem has created a tremendous amount, vast amounts of wealth that exist here. What is the real purpose? What is the purpose of all of this money that Hashem made? What is the purpose of all of these assets that Hashem put in this world? What is the purpose of all of existence? In fact, everything that Hashem created. Of course, ultimately, the purpose is that they should be used by Jews to serve Hashem, to make this world into the place that Hashem intended it, to make this world a place, a dwelling place for Hashem, to make this world ultimately the way Hashem intended it, the way Hashem intended for Jews to do. The purpose of all of the wealth is ultimately to make this world a place in which godliness is revealed and godliness is apparent. Hashem gave human beings free choice, and human beings can do all sorts of things with the wealth that Hashem has created. But that's the purpose. When the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, the Jewish people knew that they were going to leave and lead. They were going to leave Egypt, lead and live a godly life. And that all of the assets that they had, all of the wealth that they had, was ultimately going to be used to facilitate this godly life. They knew they were one day going to build a Mishkan and a Beis HaMikdash. They knew they were one day going to go into Eretz Yisrael. They knew they were one day going to be able to learn Torah and fulfill mitzvahs. And they knew that the more they had from a physical perspective, the more they would be able to use all of it to facilitate a life of serving Hashem. And so Hashem told the Jews when they left Egypt, V'nitzaltem es Mitzrayim, Hashem said, I want you to empty out Egypt of all of its wealth. You see, as long as the wealth was in the hands of the Egyptians, it wasn't really being used for the purpose for which it was created. It wasn't really being used to serve a godly purpose. Hashem says, this wealth that I have created, it has a godly spark in it, meaning it has the potential to be used for a godly purpose. Hashem turns to the Jews and says, it's your job and it's your responsibility to take this wealth with you out of Mitzrayim to make sure that it one day gets used for the purpose it was created for initially. And that is to somehow facilitate a world in which godliness is revealed and Jews learn Torah and do mitzvahs. So this wasn't just the idea. Here's the first point. The idea of the Jews leaving Egypt with wealth. It wasn't just a reward for the Jewish people for their hard work. It wasn't just some form of compensation for the Jewish people after having suffered in Egypt. It wasn't just so that Hashem could fulfill the promise he made to Avraham Avinu, where he promised Avraham Avinu that the Jews would leave with great wealth. There was a purpose in the Jews having this wealth, and it wasn't just for the Jews, it was for the wealth itself. The wealth itself needed redemption. Just like the Jews needed to be redeemed from Egypt, the wealth also needed to be redeemed from Egypt. Why does wealth need to be redeemed? Well, because wealth was created by Hashem for a purpose. And the purpose wasn't that it should be in the hands of an oppressive, abusive nation like the Egyptians. The purpose of the wealth wasn't that it should sit in the hands of idol worshippers who promote and perpetuate the reality in which you can make other people your slaves. The purpose of the wealth is l'sakein olam b'malchus shin daled yud, to facilitate a world in which Hashem's presence is revealed and Hashem's presence is felt. Hashem said to the Jews as they left Egypt, you are now going to become Or LaGoyim. You're now going to become a light unto the nations. You're now going to embark upon your own journey where you're going to teach the whole world about how to serve Hashem. Make sure you take the Egyptian wealth. The wealth needs to be redeemed as well, so that the wealth can be used for the purpose for which it was created in the first place. Again, the point here is, the Mekubalim explain, that the wealth itself also needed to be redeemed together with the Jews. When they left Egypt, they took the Egyptian wealth together with them so that the wealth would experience the redemption and would be able for the first time in its existence to be used from a godly perspective for the purpose for which it was created, namely to facilitate the Jews living a godly life and spreading Hashem's presence in this world. Excuse me. It's similar, the idea is similar to a beautiful concept articulated by the Rambam. Bear with me for just a minute. I want to connect this to a beautiful idea that the Rambam explains. The Rambam writes at great length that the reward that Jews receive for studying Torah, for fulfilling mitzvahs, for leading a godly life as a Jew should, the reward that we receive is not a physical reward. Right? One of the 13 principles of faith is the concept of reward, that when a Jew fulfills his divine mandate in this world, there is a spiritual, there is a reward for it. The Rambam says this reward is not experienced in a physical sense, it's experienced in a spiritual sense. It means after 100, all right, it's based on a Gemara, I don't want to get into it right now. The Gemara says, Schar mitzvah b'hai amaleka, there's no reward for mitzvahs in this world. The reward for mitzvahs is in the world to come. The Gemara says this because certain sages of the Mishnah and Gemara were terribly disturbed philosophically and emotionally. They were disturbed by the fact that they saw Torah law-abiding citizens, religious Jews, people who were fulfilling the word of Hashem and fulfilling mitzvahs for which they were promised reward by the Torah. They saw them not receiving the reward that they were promised. Right? There's certain mitzvahs, the Torah says, if you fulfill these mitzvahs, you get long life. The Gemara says one of the sages saw somebody fulfill 2 mitzvahs for which the Torah promises you get long life. Right? He saw him climb up, fulfill the instruction of his father. He climbed up a tree and he sent away the mother bird. 2 mitzvahs, kibud av v'em and shiluach hakein. For both mitzvahs, the Torah says you get arichas yom, you get long life. And as this individual came down from the tree, he fell to his death. And the Gemara says, what's going on over here? The Torah promises us long life. And he died on the way down from the tree as he was fulfilling an instruction from his father and sending away the mother bird. 2 mitzvahs for which the Torah says you get long life. And he plunges to his death. And the Gemara brushes off the question. No problem, says the Gemara. Schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka. There's no mitzvah, there's no reward for mitzvahs in this world. The reward for mitzvahs is in the world to come. End of discussion. When the Torah says you get long life, it means you get long life in Gan Eden, whatever that means. So the Rambam talks about this. The Rambam says the reward for mitzvahs is in the world to come. Spiritually. Don't do mitzvahs for the sake of physical reward. That's not the reward. The reward is experienced in Gan Eden when Mashiach comes, Tchias HaMesim, etc., etc. This the Rambam says. Frek the Rambam asks a question on himself. The Rambam says, really? How can I tell you that there's no reward for mitzvahs in this world? How can I tell you that the reward for mitzvahs is experienced in the world to come? That's not what the pasuk says. Take a look, says the Rambam in Parshas B'chukaisai, at the end of Chumash Vayikra. The pasuk says, "In B'chukaisai telechu," if you follow my mitzvahs, "Ves mitzvahs tishmoru," and you guard my commandments, "V'nosati gishmeichem b'yitam," I'll give you rain in its proper time, and the fruit trees will grow fruit, and the land will produce its produce, and you will be wealthy, and you will be happy in a materialistic way. So why am I, the Rambam asks this question on himself. So why, says the Rambam, am I telling you that there's no reward for mitzvahs in this world, or the rewards in the world to come? When the Torah itself says that if you study Torah and you follow mitzvahs, you'll get rewarded. You'll be healthy, wealthy, and wise in a literal physical sense. What am I arguing with a pasuk? The Rambam asks this on himself. Says the Rambam, no. That's not what the pasuk is saying. Yes, the pasuk says that if you study Torah and you fulfill mitzvahs, Hashem will bless you with health, wealth, and wisdom in a physical sense. But that's not the reward. The reward you get in the world to come. So why is Hashem giving me all of these physical blessings if I study Torah and fulfill mitzvahs? You know why, says the Rambam? Because Hashem sees a Jew studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, living a godly life as a Jew should. Hashem says, if this is the path you choose, I'll facilitate this path for you. I'll make you successful in a monetary, literal, and physical sense so that you can study more Torah, so that you can fulfill more mitzvahs. But the path which you choose, Hashem says, I'll facilitate that path for you. I'll empower you and I'll enable you to be able to study more and to fulfill more and to lead more of a godly life. Please, God. If this is the choice you take, then this is the choice I'll facilitate. Hashem says, no problem. But the Rambam says, but that's not the reward. The reward is in the world to come. I'll give you my own analogy for it. It's a silly analogy, but an analogy nonetheless. You have, let's say, a boss and an employee, right? So the boss tells the employee, if I see that you're doing a good job, I'll give you a comfortable office. I'll give you a comfortable desk. I'll give you a good computer. I'll give you. I'll hire other people under you to help you. All of this is not the employee's pay. It's not the salary for his work. The salary for his work he gets at the end of the month when he gets a paycheck. So why is the employer throwing all of these benefits at him? Right? A better office and a better computer and a better telephone and better people under him. That's not his payment. That's not the salary for his work. That's in order to facilitate that he should work better, that he should be able to be more productive. So the boss will say, if I see that you're productive, I'll give you tools to be more productive. But that's not the payment for the work. The payment is after 120. Excuse me. The payment is at the end of the month when you get a paycheck. So the Rambam is saying the same thing. Hashem looks at a Jew and says, look, the reward for the mitzvahs, the paycheck, that comes after 120 in Gan Eden, when Mashiach comes, please God. But in the meanwhile, along the way, if I see that you're making the right choices, if I see that you're doing the right thing, so then Hashem says, so then I'll empower you and facilitate and give you tools and means that will be useful to you in order to continue leading and living a godly life, to do more. To learn more Torah and do more mitzvahs and make and leave more of a godly impact on the world around you and on the environment around you. Let's go back. So when Hashem told the Jewish people to take the Egyptian wealth, the Kabbalists explain, it wasn't meant just to be understood as a reward. It wasn't meant to be understood just as compensation. There's something much deeper going on over here. Actually, the money that they took was part of their mandate. It was part of their mission statement. It was part of their constitution. As becoming a Jewish nation, as becoming a godly nation, they were empowered, they were obligated to use the wealth at their disposal to live as Jews should live, to teach the world how to use money in a healthy, godly way. And so because of that, even if the Jewish people said, we don't want wealth, let's say the Jews would have said, you know what, we'd rather leave Mitzrayim sooner. Let the Egyptians keep their money, I don't care. Hashem said no. Hashem says, Hashem, need you to take the Egyptian wealth with you wherever you go, so that one day you can use the wealth for the purpose it was intended. This is called, the term for this is called Birur HaNitzaitis. Birur HaNitzaitis means redeeming or purifying or elevating the sparks of godliness in the materialistic wealth, using it for the godly purpose for which it was intended. And Hashem told the Jewish people even more than this. Hashem told the Jews, V'nitzaltem es Mitzrayim. I want you to empty out Mitzrayim. Take as much as you can of the wealth of Egypt to be used, please God, one day, as the Jewish people should. Now, what were they going to do with all of it? At this point, they didn't know. They didn't know exactly how they were going to use it, but they knew they were going to find a way to use this as part of being a godly nation and a godly people. Okay. So they leave Mitzrayim and they take the Egyptian wealth as much as they can. 7 days later, they experience the splitting of the sea, one of the greatest revelations of godliness of all times. And when it's over, they take a look at the floor and they see it's laden all across the banks of the sea. There's more wealth than they left Mitzrayim with. So the Jews look at each other after having experienced such a tremendous revelation of godliness. They look at each other and they look at the wealth and say, we're not leaving until we take this wealth as well. Why? Not because they were motivated from a materialistic perspective. They were not motivated from a materialistic perspective. This wasn't about the money in a materialistic sense. Number one, they already had a lot. Number two, they didn't need any more. Number three, there was nothing for them to do with it right now. Number four, they just experienced one of the greatest revelations of godliness ever. So why are they so busy collecting money? Because they know there's a mandate from Hashem, v'nitzaltem es Mitzrayim. They were given an instruction from Hashem to take the Egyptian wealth and to take it to Matan Torah, and to take it to Eretz Yisrael, and to take it to the Mishkan, and to take it to the Beis HaMikdash, and to be used for purposes of holiness. They'd had an instruction from Hashem to take as much of it as possible. Specifically, B'dafka, because they knew that they were going to lead a godly life. They wanted to take with it as much as possible. They didn't want to leave even one drop of it behind, not even a drop. They wanted to redeem as much gold and silver as they could. They wanted to start to do their mission as godly people and invest and infuse godliness in everything they could touch without leaving even a single thing behind. Because they were starting to discover their own spiritual and godly potential and how they could infuse godliness into so many things. There's a very scary Maimar Chazal, there's a very scary saying of the rabbis. The rabbi said that to waste time is, in a sense, the greatest of all sins. The exact word, the way they articulated this is Viter HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God is prepared to be mavater, to forgive, to at some point heal. Even if a Jew sins with, God forbid, idol worship, murder, and immorality and incest. But Hashem doesn't let go. Hashem can't be mavater, can't forgive, so to speak, when a Jew wastes time that could be used for studying Torah or for fulfilling mitzvahs or something like that. There's more to talk about that saying of the rabbis, but for now, let's take this point. What it's saying is that there's a particular spiritually painful element to the sin of wasting time that's worse than any other sin. Why? What's so bad about wasting time? What's so bad about it is that there's no way to get it back. There is a moment, there is a potential. There's something that could have been achieved. There's something that could have been done in that one particular moment that if you wasted the moment, is gone. No way to retrieve. Very, very, very painful. And in that sense, the worst of all sins. The Jewish people experienced a similar sensation when they stood at the Yam Suf. They looked at all of this wealth. They looked at all of this potential. And they said, how can we go anywhere? How can we move on? How can we continue to travel and take ourselves to the promised land and to Matan Torah and all the rest of it? They said, look at all this wealth. Do you know what we can do with this? We can give it to if not us, our children, if not our children, our grandchildren, if not our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, who will be, please God, for thousands of years dedicating their lives and their souls to fulfilling the word of Hashem, to teaching the word of Hashem, to imparting, to be a light into the nations, to teach it to the whole world. We can use this wealth to promote the agenda of Hashem. We can do good stuff with it. They didn't want to walk away from it. They were motivated. They were driven specifically, but dafka, because they had just seen such a great revelation of Hashem. They didn't want to walk away from it. Until Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jews and tapped them on the shoulder and said, my dear Jews, you've made a mistake. You've made a mistake. It's time to drop this, and it's time to move away. It's time to put down the money. It's time to put down all of what you perceive to be this incredible potential. It's time to put it down and walk away, which the Jews do, but they do begrudgingly, because they're struggling to walk away from all of this potential. And Moshe says, says Moshe Rabbeinu, you're making a terrible mistake. You're making a terrible mistake. The Jews said, what kind of mistake are we making? We are fulfilling the word of Hashem. Hashem said, empty out Egypt, and Egypt isn't empty. Hashem said, redeem the wealth, and the wealth hasn't all been redeemed. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, Oy Gewalt. Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, my dear Jews, no. You're only supposed to do this as long as Hashem wants you to. Have you forgotten, Moshe Rabbeinu says, as smart as you are and as intelligent as you are and as spiritually driven as you are, there comes a time where any particular avodah, there comes a time where any service of Hashem ends and it's time to continue with something else. And when that time comes, you have to move on and go. Moshe Rabbeinu says the same Hashem that told you to take Egyptian wealth right now says travel. Travel. It was Moshe Rabbeinu's one more reminder to the Jews that in order to use the wealth and in order to fulfill their mandate and in order to do every aspect of their shlichus that they had, in order to do all of this, they had to be ready at a moment's notice to fulfill some different instruction from Hashem, if that's what Hashem wants, and go off in a different direction and leave behind the wealth when it's time to leave it, and follow Moshe Rabbeinu into a desert without water toward Matan Torah and toward Eretz Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu said, as passionate and as excited as you are about fulfilling this instruction, about elevating these sparks of holiness and godliness to Hashem, as much passion as you have in fulfilling this instruction from Hashem, you fulfill this instruction from Hashem until it's time to fulfill a different instruction from Hashem. And when it's time to fulfill a different instruction from Hashem, you close the book on the previous chapter and you start the next one. The test of humility, the test of not being agenda-driven, the test, the litmus test of how dedicated to the cause a Jew really is and how much he or she can be a transparent conduit to allow the will of Hashem to flow through them and into this world, is if and when Hashem calls upon us to do something differently than we've done it until now, a Jew's got to be ready to go. And in the end, that's really the lesson that the Torah is teaching us. The Torah is teaching us that as important as the avodah the Jews did until now, and as important as it was for every Jew to leave Egypt with 90 donkeys laden with the gold and silver of Egypt, as important as all of that was, it was only important as long as that was the will of Hashem. And the moment Hashem said, right, we're done, it's time to move on. It's time to travel into a desert where there's nothing to drink and you're going to wonder how you're going to survive because the water is bitter. The moment Hashem tells you to do that, you invest the same enthusiasm and you invest the same excitement and you invest the same passion into now fulfilling a different mitzvah of Hashem and going off in a different direction. Or in the words of somebody who said just a couple of months ago, when we were forced to close down all our shuls and all our schools temporarily, somebody said, the same Hashem that wanted us to daven with a minyan until now, wanted us to daven privately then. The same Hashem that wants some people to learn Torah, wants some people to be learners. The same Hashem wants some people to be earners. The same Hashem that wants us at some point to study Torah, wants us at some point to close the book and go and work. The same Hashem that wants us to work, wants us at some point to close the business and go suspend Shabbos, the way a Jew is supposed to spend Shabbos or close the business for a couple of minutes, daven mincha. A Jew has to, in that sense, remain true to their mission. And the test of the truth of the mission is the ability to be flexible and to move back and forth as Hashem instructs us. And so the Jews, in their preparation, as they went through their training to become Jews, to become Hashem's chosen nation, were given this one final lesson by Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moshe Rabbeinu said, you may not understand it, you may not appreciate it, even from a spiritual perspective, you may stand there going, I need to take the Egyptian wealth. Moshe Rabbeinu said, and yet if Hashem says it's time to go, it's time to go. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful Shabbos.